Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Really excited to talk to my guest today. Let me tell you a little bit about Timothy Wyllie. Timothy Wyllie is an author of many, many books. I'm sitting here looking at the list, and there's quite an extensive list. Everything from Rebel Angels in Exile, Confessions of a Rebel Angel, Adventures Among Spiritual Intelligences, Dolphins, ETs, and Angels, and of course recently the Helianx Propostion, Return of the Red Serpent. Timothy Wyllie is also a graphic artist as well, and I don't know if this is the right terminology, and Timothy will correct me, a survivor of a 70s cult, as they say. Anyway, so without further ado, let me welcome Timothy Wyllie to the Just Bernard Show. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today, Timothy.
Well, thank you, Bernard. That's a very long introduction. I have got a number of books out there. Not an enormous number of books. I didn't want to cut down too many trees. I tried to restrict it to one every 10 years, but it didn't work out like that.
Timothy, when did you start writing? When was the first book that you released?
The first book was released in '84, and it probably took me about 4 years to write it, I guess. So I started writing in about 1980. And, like all my books, it's experiential. I really got interested in dolphins through a series of synchronicities. And so I just kind of threw myself into the water with them to see what would happen. And that led to, a whole series of situations with, extraterrestrials and then with angels. And it kind of opened me up. It was a really an extraordinary sort of prizing open of a whole series of things I'd been interested in for a long time. They suddenly came to a head, and I was able to sort of get it together and really, try to understand the impact that the invisible world, the angels and the intelligent dolphins, our extraterrestrial friends who are here as well. What is the impact of them on the way we're living our lives that we're not really aware of? That was really what was interesting me.
And I would think we're probably seeing more and more of that impact. And these days, I would think, I'm hearing more and more people communicating with extraterrestrials and, how do we say, non-visible entities. Have you noticed the same thing?
Oh, well, of course. Yes, absolutely. And in fact, the first 3 books that I wrote, as I said, I wrote one every 10 years, in order to sort of examine the progress everything was making. And yes, I'm seeing it all sort of, all rolling out as we speak. And especially the extraterrestrial thing, of course, is probably the most obvious and potent. And I think, if one watches cable television, it's quite interesting how much more open they are now to being able to, go ahead and accept the fact this is something they don't understand, as opposed to chalking it down to some imaginary idea of, swamp gas or whatever.
Yeah. And it's for me, it seems like we're becoming either not only more open to it, but also becoming more logical in the way that we're approaching it. And I guess, I don't know if I mean that in a scientific way, but the skepticism has created a kind of a wonderful way of making it more tangible and making the connection or the communication even realer. I don't know if that makes sense. A great example, geez, back in the late, I don't know how you say it, the 2000s, between 2000 and 2010. I remember a lot of people, and we still have it. We have people channeling the Council of Light and this council, and the Galactic Council, and the Arcturians and the Pleiadians, and there seemed to have been a common thread where somebody had mentioned something that if it has nuts and bolts, it's probably created by man. And and I just found that to be, yes, thank you for saying that.
Yes, that's very funny. I have a thing that I joke about, and it's how do you tell the difference between a genuine ET and a government craft? And if you weigh that, then the ET will wiggle his wings.
Very true. Very true. Now, Timothy, you have led a very interesting life. As a matter of fact, you're a bit, I guess, hearkened to some of our pop culture from the '60s and '70s. You were involved in the Process Church, and there's been talk that perhaps Marilyn Manson. Listen to me, I'm showing my age here. Charles Manson was like getting advice and whatnot from that. Tell us a little bit about your story before you became an author and the very interesting your very interesting time with the Process Church, which I guess splintered away from L. Ron Hubbard, and he renounced everybody there or something like that.
Well, yes, that's quite remarkable. Let me just straighten out the
Yes.
Manson thing to start with. We had nothing to do with Manson.
Okay.
That was something put out by Scientology in order to deflect the fact that, when they raided the Span Ranch, they found Scientology material there. And, of course, Scientology didn't want to be associated with Manson, so they immediately put out a press release accusing us of being behind it. And, of course, we had nothing to do with it.
Okay.
It's one of those things.
And they're still doing things like that, from what I understand.
Well, I imagine so. Actually, I just noticed there's a new book out. I haven't read it yet. There's a new book out that I think really does go into deconstructing Scientology in one of the most sensible ways. But yes, let's get back to your original question. I think much more interesting than Scientology.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that that we have become, I like to say, more rational. Because going back to the early days, 500, 600 years ago, when we thought, the Earth was the center of the universe. And it's really been a process of gradually sort of detaching from these egocentric ways, that we think were absolutely, the most important beings in the universe. And this has kind of devolved into, over the last sort of 50 or 60 years, of saying, well, therefore we're the only inhabited planet, getting into that sort of frame of reference. But of course, the great contradiction is, for at least 50 or 60 years, the government has been very actively involved with extraterrestrial interest.
Yeah.
So there's this sort of contradiction right at the center of, this, the situation that we're in right now. And of course, it's been very damaging in many ways because so many people have had really authentic experiences, and then they've been poo-pooed or dismissed or, laughed at in some way, and I think it's become very damaging over the long run. But of course, it pushes each one of us into making up our own minds, because the more obvious the government is in making these absurd claims, the more we kind of tend to say, okay, we're going to rely on ourselves, our own perceptions in this situation.
Yes, very much so. I agree. Now, so as far as I read a blog, of course, as I'm researching the show, I had to look up some of your work and whatnot, and you had put out a book on the Process Church where I don't know whether it was a blogger or the person who interviewed you, whether it was a live interview, but he called you a survivor of a cult. And I know this was a big thing back in the 70s. I remember being a small child, and it's like, oh, you have to escape the cult. And right now, of course, in the conspiracy world, everyone's like, oh, everyone's in the cults and the Illuminati and whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, what was to you now looking back? What was your experience like with the Process Church? Were you being held captive? Were you being brainwashed, or did you
No,
go? Did you leave freely of your own accord?
yes, of course I did. I had to fight my way out, of course, because the value of a cult is basically comes when you leave. That's when a cult really becomes valuable. Because you see, I mean, the concept of cult has been very sort of bad mouthed recently, because of the bad behavior of certain of the cults, really bad
Yeah,
behavior.
yeah.
But of course, Christianity, everything was a cult to begin with. It's just when does a cult stop becoming a cult and start becoming an authentic religion? Have
Very
the
true.
Seventh-day Adventists, are they still a cult? Is Mormonism still a cult? It's hard to say. But anyway, I find, on the whole, value of a cult is that it allows people to experience things that they wouldn't be able to experience under normal conditions in life. It throws them into different situations, extreme situations. If it's a good cult, by which I mean if it's an effective cult, that it throws you into situations of, say, leadership, or throws you into situations of having to be led, of knowing how to submit to leadership. It throws you into situations, as it did with me, of being very close to death in a number of situations. How do I behave in that situation? That's where we find ourselves. Where we're approaching, a very sort of life-threatening situation. That's why people go to war, to find out who they are.
Yeah.
We go to a cult to find out who we are, and if we find out who we are, of course, we leave the cult. It's called killing the Buddha on the road.
Yes. Yes.
You kind of climb out of it, and it has to be difficult. It's like a birth process in many ways, because one has to de-pattern oneself in many ways. Because I only spent 13 years in the process. A lot of other people have spent a lot more time in different cults, and it's of course much more difficult to get out. Some of my friends are still in, what the process has now become, which is something else. And there, there are people in their late 60s, early 70s. What are they going to do? What are they going to do if they suddenly say, "My God, I've made a mistake so much"?
Yes. Yes.
It's not possible, really.
Well, you brought up a very good point there, because it becomes a part of one's identity, just like some of the more accepted modern religions are. I don't even know if I want to call them modern, but the accepted Western religions, where people, when they begin to question, they become very concerned that they're losing their identity.
Yes. Yes, it's a strange one, isn't it? Because, in a sense, one has to lose oneself in order to regain oneself.
Yes.
And there are very few ways in life that one can do that, in a sensible way. By which I mean in a way that one's understanding what one's doing, or at least it is understood. Even in marriage, you get it. Some people say, well, really good marriages are when, those people are so completely sort of devoted to the other person that they've completely lost themselves. So it's a tricky area.
Yes.
The main thing, of course, is to regain one's power. And in regaining, one understands it, of course, because those people don't really understand the nature of power.
Agreed. And just to wrap up this segment of our talk here, we have about a little less than 10 minutes left in this first quarter of the show. I'm just curious, personally speaking, from as someone who has studied many different spiritual paths and studied the ancient occult. I know L. Ron Hubbard was involved with who was the guy with the Jack Parsons, the rocket guy, I'll call him. Jack Parsons, Aleister Crowley, and all of those people, and my understanding of the mythology, because I look at your work, and you, of course, create a beautiful scenario of how do we say, a beautiful cosmology that actually I could probably align with and relate to. But you're not saying that this is the only cosmology, whereas L. Ron Hubbard had a very colorful cosmology and kind of turned it into, well, I guess mind control. Is that a fair thing to say about him? I don't know.
No, I would say so. Yes, I would say the more unrealistic the cosmology, the more ardently it has to be held.
Ah, very fair.
I don't hold my cosmology that hard because, in my mind, I think he's probably pretty true, pretty accurate. The reason I chose to follow this particular path, which I think we'll come to at some point. I don't know if you've come across the Urantia book.
Yes, of course.
Very substantial piece of work. But it was the one cosmology I came across external to myself that matched my own experiences most closely. Not completely, but most closely. Mm-hmm. And that's why I choose to sort of, work with that as opposed to work with sort of classical Christianity or, classical Buddhism or whatever. Because this particular cosmology was the one that rang my bell. And I should say that I had a near-death experience in 1973.
Yes, tell us a bit.
Well, that really kind of opened me up because I had a chance to kind of, see angels, experience angels. And I was one of, I think, probably rather few people who've been told that they had completed what they had come to do, which is in itself an interesting race. It's a
oh my goodness,
interesting situation, and that I was being given the choice either to continue or to go back. Why I chose to go back is still puzzles me.
Yeah, you're questioning that decision, huh?
I think it was because it was such a wonderful situation. I mean, the after death, environment is just wonderful, just amazingly ecstatic. If you don't find yourself in an unpleasant place, it's a wonderful experience. And I realized that if I went on, it was just going to go more and more wonderful. But if I went back, I just didn't know what would happen. And I think it was my curiosity that got me back. And I'm grateful, of course I'm grateful I came back because it allowed me to get on with my work,
Absolutely. It's very interesting because I have to say I myself had a near-death experience and most people that I have heard or come in contact with who have had a similar experience are always told you have to go back. And you were given a choice, so that's very, very interesting.
Well, yes, of course. And you see, in 1973, this was before the books came out, and nobody knew anything about near-death experiences at that point. They weren't talked about. Doctors would deny them, or didn't say they were the result of, anesthetics or whatever. Mine was just, I wasn't in a hospital or anything like that. It was just me, me and the angels. And of course, I was healed out there as well. They give me healing. Mm-hmm. I wrote about it in this first book, of course, because it really was a turning point in my life. It took about 7 years to get to assimilate it, because, as you know, it's incredibly profound. I mean, it is probably the most profound experience available to people.
Absolutely. I actually wrote a book about mine as well, the contact with the beings that I came in contact with, and it is life changing. It truly is.
You can't come back the same person.
Well, no, you can't. No, you can't, and it does change you. May I ask, how old were you when that happened? What age were you at?
I was 33.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. So you already had the youthful indiscretions out of the way.
Very much so.
Mine happened at the beginning of mine, so it took me another 5 to 10 years to kind of embrace it. But
how old were you?
I was 24.
Well, that's not bad.
And it was very hard. It was like I still wanted to live in both worlds, knowing what I knew, but also living and making believe I didn't know,
Well, it is tricky, isn't it? Because, of course, one of the things one realizes is that one is here to live the life of a human being, whatever one discovers about oneself. One is here to live the human life. And it's very nice to be, to know that all this other stuff goes on, exists, and, the reasons for these various different things. But down here, is you pay your taxes, you write your books. I'd love to read your book, by the way. Can we do an exchange of some sort? I'd love to read it.
Oh, I'd love to. Absolutely. I have it on file. I have the PDF available for you. Definitely.
Ooh, well, please send it to me. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And let me ask you a little bit. We have about 3 more minutes on this. Do you consider yourself a Urantia author, or do they accept your work, or do you just touch on the subject?
I have a somewhat uneasy relationship with them. I would put it that way. I think they would regard me as a rebel. But what is interesting is that a number of them kind of contact me, under the radar, as it were.
I see.
And I have not a substantial following, but a certain amount of people do, because in a way, especially in my Rebel Angel books, they are really fairly complicated in terms of, I'm working with an angel who's telling a 500,000-year story.
Yes.
So it's quite a large frame we're working with.
And is this the angel that worked with you on the Helianx Proposition?
Oh, no. You see, the interesting thing about the Helianx Proposition is that I received it in the late 70s in a piece of automatic writing. It was before I had really, made close contact even with my guardian angels, which I had, in 1980. So it was really my first real foray into trying to work out what on earth is going on down here.
Well, we're definitely. I'm sorry I haven't read your earlier works. I'm very interested in hearing and knowing a little bit more about this angel that has a 500,000-year-old story. As a matter of fact, that we were just having a. God, who did we have on last week? Oh, we had a gentleman, Chris Jones, another author, who is working with some, I guess for lack of a better term, alternative archaeologists, and how these archaeologists are saying, humanity has been around much longer than the mainstream wants to tell us,
Oh, yeah. Oh, indeed they have.
And the cycles of, of the golden era and collapsing and rebuilding, and another golden era and collapsing and rebuilding, and probably happened several times, But
oh, yeah. Lemuria was,
yes,
probably the most sophisticated civilization that's ever been on the planet.
Yes.
And that lasted about 40,000 years.
Really? I didn't know it lasted that long. Wow.
Yeah.
And did I'm sorry, like I said, I didn't read the earlier of your books, but what did the angel call themselves? The angel that told you the 500,000-year-old story?
Well, actually, I called her. Is my name for her. Angels really don't have names.
Right.
If you're telepathic, you really don't need a name.
You can say that again, yes.
Yeah.
So you called
I called her Georgia.
Oh, you called her Georgia. Oh, I knew that. I'm so sorry. Yes, I remember that. Did you pick Georgia for a reason, or?
It's it's a kind of joke on my father, who was George. And he left when I was 2. I never knew him, so it was a little kind of tweaking him a little bit.
Right. Very good. Well,
I did have a long conversation with him when I was in Israel after he died. It's much easier to talk to people after they're dead.
It sure is. I agree with that. Usually, especially dealing with fathers, sometimes it's a lot easier after.
You're right. You got it.
I get along with my father much better now.
Indeed.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to be taking a very short break, and we are going to return to our conversation with Timothy Wyllie in just a moment.
And Now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
And welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Today we are speaking with Timothy Wyllie, the author of the Helianx Proposition, Return of the Red Serpent. And before we went on the break, Timothy was just starting to tell us a little bit about Georgia, who has a 500,000-year-old history of our planet. And I was talking a little bit about how many of the alternative researchers and archaeologists are agreeing that humanity has a much longer story to tell. So, Timothy, I was wondering if you could share a little bit some of the key points, perhaps, that Georgia shared with you about our humanity and our history.
Well, it's obviously a very long story.
Yes.
I mean, we're currently now working on the fifth volume. Four volumes are coming out, and 8 volumes have been written, and I don't think she's finished with me yet.
Wonderful.
Yeah, well, basically, the story is that she arrived here about 500,000 years ago with the first of the kind of the interventions. Now, these aren't precisely extraterrestrial interventions. They're what one would call intraterrestrial. They come from the angelic realms.
Yes.
Because you can conveniently divide the universe, or the multiverse as I call it, into 2 great sections. One is the external, the outer worlds, the worlds of the extraterrestrials, and us and everything like that, all the stuff that we can see and touch and smell and feel. And then there are the inner worlds that we contact through our imagination, and the inner worlds are the worlds of the angels, and they're the administrators, if you like, of the multiverse. They kind of guide the way the multiverse moves, because it is, in a sense, a university. It is a great teaching machine. We're in a universe, that's what they call universes. It's a university, and we're all here to learn. And when we die, of course, we move on to the next phase, and the next phase, and it's a very long journey. And that's all administered from the inner world by the angels. So she was one of the cadre of angels who arrived here to accompany this first intervention. And the intervention is kind of the echoes of it. You can find it through the sort of the belief system, some of those Middle East belief systems, as the they appear as sort of actually often in rather sort of poor light, as sort of giants and that sort of evil doing kind of angels. But that really, of course, wasn't the situation.
Is it similar to what people would call like the Nephilim and that's
that's kind of it. I mean, the problem is, as you said, human history is so much longer than we had any idea, and of course, so much longer than they had any idea as well. I mean, even sort of 2,000 or 3,000 BC, they didn't know that their life stretched back, a few 100,000 years before that. They were sort of, still looking at these extraordinary things that we're still finding under the ocean. Great towns and cities, that just went below the rising ocean.
Yeah.
They of course had to cope with that. We're just discovering that now.
Yes, and apparently there was I guess many great floods, for lack of a better term, but I'm sure there was other cataclysms involved throughout our history. being the Earth is alive and it is going to go through cycles, I would think. Uh,
That's exactly it.
you say an intervention. What does intervention mean in this sense?
Well, the planets are made for people, not people for planets. Uh, we're in, if you like, a sort of a kindergarten,
Yeah.
and we're being sort of taught, if you like, from the inside. Let me go back. I'm sorry, I lost the thread of your original question. What was your question exactly?
Well, we were talking about some of the featured points of the story that Georgia was telling you, but you had mentioned that she came during one of the first interventions. So I was curious because I hear so much, or I'm sure you've heard the same thing, that Earth is on a quarantine, that we are not allowed to communicate with the other civilizations around the universe because we haven't quite gotten there. And I'm wondering if this intervention was to perhaps help us with our evolutionary process, or what is it that
Well,
was
yes,
meant?
yes, it certainly was. I mean, it's something that all planets go through. All of these sort of 3D planets go through this.
Right.
Because we're being grown, we're being cultured. Um, the quarantine came sometime later because this was about 500,000 years ago. The quarantine hit because of the rebellion among the angels about 203,000 years ago. So, it was about half time, if you like, when the rebellion hit. And it was interesting to me. I caught the sort of the name of your outfit, of the revolution, and of course, the rebels believed it was a revolution.
Yeah.
The administration called it a rebellion.
Of
It's a very
course.
subtle difference.
Of
But
course.
yes, this and another 36 other planets went into alignment, if you like, with the rebel faction. And we were promptly isolated, to prevent the rebellions, the revolution from spreading. And they did keep it fairly contained. 37 planets, I suppose, out of it's a relatively sort of small affair if you imagine an enormous populated universe subdivided into all these various sort of smaller and smaller quadrants. And the quadrant we're in is what's known as a local system of 1,000 inhabited planets, and we're one of those. They're not all inhabited yet. They're to be inhabited. I think about 700 are actually inhabited at this point.
My
So it
goodness.
was a local situation, and the rebellion was really, between the angels who taken care of, overseeing this particular segment of this enormous sort of multiverse, and they were really rebelling against, the centralized authority, basically, how it's done, the status quo.
I can't help but feel or sense the parallels of the biblical stories or the biblical cosmology of Yahweh, the jealous, vengeful God, and the rebel angel Lucifer, who decided he wanted to stare and worship humans instead of the administration.
Well, that's the Bible story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is. You can find echoes of this story sort of reappearing, but it's actually most clearly obvious in the way we humans have behaved for the last 200, 3,000 years. We're a rebellious lot. We're still doing it really. And the imprint, if you like, of rebellion against authority, of questioning authority, is deeply embedded. As children, almost all children have really very, very finely tuned sense of righteousness, of what's right and what's wrong. They really have to be taught.
It begs to question: is the rebellion a just rebellion, or is it us being bratty children?
depends who you ask.
Yes, I would think so. I would think so. And the reason why I bring this up is because I do hear so much about, the again, going back into the, I guess, whatever we have it now, the consciousness movement, the New Age movement, whatever it is we're calling it this week, about the Galactic Federation and the Arcturians and the Pleiadians, and are we rebelling against a tyrannical, a universal oligarchy or hierarchy, or are they are the rebellious angels trying to help us to come into our full spiritual evolution?
Well, the answer is both. Yes. It's probably best to regard it as a sort of more like a play in which everybody believes the part that they're playing. The whole world is a stage. If the whole world's a stage, then the whole multiverse is a theater itself. So it's actually an incredibly complex situation, because, of course, the first thing one has to ask is, in a well-ordered multiverse, they must be well-ordered, otherwise it'd be chaotic. Is it really possible that a revolution such as this one could have taken place without, the higher-ups knowing about it or having some sort of hand in it? Were the more sort of covert operations involved? Because what we've been able to develop by being isolated, we've been able to develop a tremendously strong sense of self. It's a very unusual quality in the universe, because, of course, on most planets like this, extraterrestrials come and go. Angels are familiar. We all, know about angels and everything. So it's more like sort of other people are responsible for us. Here we have to take responsibility for ourselves, So it's a double-edged sword. In many ways, from the administration's point of view, it was a horrible thing. No administration likes a rebellion. And from the rebels' point of view, we had to have something to kick against. We needed to, develop something, like children growing up, opposing a parent. You need to kick against something in order to know who you are. So, in a very larger scale, I think that's really also what's been going on. As I say, it's a very complex situation.
It's very interesting that you mentioned the fact that we have evolved into these very self-responsible, or I don't want to say maybe self-identify might be a better word, but and the reason why I bring it up is in my interaction with my guides, they presented themselves to me as trans-dimensional entities of light, and I don't know if that would fall under the same definition of what you would call the angelic. But one of the things that the characteristics that I got from them, and they explained it in my book, actually, that they have a collective consciousness, but yet they have individual traits, if that makes any sense. Maybe it's through the lack of the telepathy that's available to them. They have a collective consciousness in that realm, but there's still a little bit of an individual characteristics to the tones when one speaks individually, if that makes any sense.
Oh, well, it absolutely does. Yes, I mean, we don't lose our individuality. This is, I think, where dolphins are great sort of, trainers of this particular understanding. Because, if you're in the water with dolphins, they'll be all sort of playing with each other and everything, and then one will detach itself and come over and pay one complete attention, and play with one, and then they'll go off and be part of the collective again. And the ability to move in and out of this individual and collective, I think, is something that we're all learning to do. And of course, as we become more telepathic, as we are becoming more, as we have to become more telepathic, it becomes, more important in a sense.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't say this in jest. I say this in, oh my goodness, there could be something there. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. How much of the dolphin story of that is is real.
Yeah,
Are
uh,
dolphins aliens? Are dolphins more evolved than us? Are dolphins a teaching instrument for us here on Earth? What have they said to you?
some are, some aren't. I don't know if you know the Dogon material,
Yes.
the Syrian stuff. Um, yeah, within that, what the Syrian uh, entities told the Dogon was that the dolphins are the third Nomo, the third of their sort of classes of entities, if you like, and that they come here, all right, and then they reincarnate as human beings. That's the dance that they do. Now, I don't think this applies to all dolphins in the same way as I don't think, I know that a lot of extraterrestrials, for instance, walking around playing the human being game, but not being noticed as extraterrestrials. And I think it's probably the same with dolphins. There are dolphins who are part of uh, that particular Nomo class, and then there are sort of regular dolphins.
That would make sense. That would make sense. And I guess with speaking about the dolphins and the extraterrestrials that are playing human or playing dolphin, is there? And I've heard this, and I think I believe it, that there are souls that have incarnated into human beings that are extraterrestrial, as well as extraterrestrials that have, for lack of a better term, I guess the terminology is called a walk-in. Someone who just walks in. I don't know if you want to call it possession, but they walk into a consciousness. And
Yeah, my second book actually, I traveled for about 2 months all over the world actually with the walk-in. Yes, I got to know that
oh,
particular pattern
wonderful,
very well.
wonderful. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what that means? Because within the consciousness community, it overlaps a little bit with the conspiracy community, and the conspiracy community has this idea, thanks to David Icke, that the reptilians are walking into our leaders of the world and taking over the planet. How much of that is possible? How much of that is real? How much of that have you seen to either be positive or negative? Are walk-ins all negative? Are walk-ins all positive, or is it somewhere in between?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, walk-ins come from different places, different planets. So, for instance, a couple of Orion walk-ins I've known, or a number of them actually, are really rather kind of heavy meat eaters, grounding themselves, uh, uh, living rather sort of, rather mundane lives. There are other walk-ins who kind of, are pretty aware of who they are, because it's very strange for a walk-in. I know the last one I met, oddly enough, was in prison. I had to be put in prison overnight because I was caught smoking a little dope. And about sort of 4 o'clock in the morning, about 8 or 9, uh, fairly drunk Indians were thrown into the same jail as I was, and we got talking. And after about a silence, one of them turned to me. He said, "There's two real people down here, aren't there?" And of course, I knew exactly what he meant.
Wow, yeah.
I'd hung out with walk-ins. So we got talking, and I mean, one of the difficult things that walk-ins have, of course, nobody really believes, what they're up to and who they are. So they have a great deal of difficulty sort of, engaging, if you like. And people like myself are often schlepped into their lives in order to sort of, bring them down to earth in a way. But no, Ike is a madman. Absolute rubbish. I mean, he's an example of somebody, who sort of plunges into the New Age, who hasn't dealt with himself at all, who hasn't been into himself at all, and who just projects his own fears out and creates these absurd concepts, and because he's a charismatic man, and because people like to be frightened, as we all do from time to time. He makes his books and everything like that. But I think, in a sense, he's one of those people who I think is important for people to be able to discern. It teaches us discernment.
Yes,
Just
yes.
as the internet teaches us discernment. And there have to be people who, give us rubbish, and we can exercise our discernment. And he's one of them.
Absolutely. I'll give him this much. In the recent years, he has begun to step away from that and redefining what he meant by that. So I don't know what exactly he feels about that story, but he's walking away from it now and focusing strictly on global elitism and corporatism and whatnot.
Yeah. No, he's going to be very ashamed of himself one day when he wakes up.
I feel that's what's happening. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, good. I'm glad. I mean, I wouldn't wish anything bad to happen to anybody, but because we're all on a path learning, and we have to do things wrong before we do things right. Otherwise, if you do something right first time, you don't learn anything from it.
Yes, absolutely. And as much as I dislike, I call it fear pornography.
That's exactly it.
As much as I dislike fear pornography, I guess there is a place with some people. I just choose not to align with them.
Horror movies. I mean, that's why horror movies sell so well.
Oh yeah, I used to love horror movies as a teenager. It was a sensation that I guess we weren't used to as children, and we had no fear as young adults.
Well, it depends. I was born in a war.
Oh, so you got to see it firsthand, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to be coming up on a break in just a minute or two, and I just want to remind everybody of your book, The Helianx Proposition, which we're going to be talking about after this break that's coming up, Return of the Red Serpent, and they...
Actually, I'm sorry, I actually got that wrong. But
oh, you did? Okay.
It's actually the Rainbow Serpent, the Return of the Rainbow Serpent.
Yes, it is. It says it right here on my event calendar. I'm so sorry. Return of the Rainbow Serpent, the Helianx Proposition.
And now back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Welcome back to the justBernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We are speaking with Timothy Wyllie, and Timothy Wyllie is the author of the book The Helianx Proposition, The Return of the Rainbow Serpent. Timothy, what is the Helianx Proposition? Is it a kind of a treatise, or what is it that you received?
That's a very interesting question. I don't think I've ever tried to summarize it quite like that.
Okay.
Is it a myth? Is it well, let me tell you how it kind of came in.
Yes, please.
Yes, it was really some years after my near-death experience, I was kind of aware of the greater frame. I had done some channeling before. I'd done a little bit of automatic writing. As one does. And I guess it was before I had, really started writing books. So I didn't think of myself as a writer. And it was one evening, I was on my own, and I was contemplating the whole business of the Garden of Eden. What does that mean? What was that all about? Obviously we know the biblical story. I didn't need to go into that. And my kind of natural rebelliousness, wanted to sort of look for something deeper, because it seemed to be that the serpent, was making some sense. And I thought to myself, well, we know about Adam, we know about Eve, but we know very little about the serpent. We've just got this idea, the Christian idea that he was perhaps satanic, but even that's not really sort of explained in any real sense. So I sort of, grabbed my pen and I said, well, who was this serpent in the Garden of Eden? And my pen started writing, and 6 hours later I had this document. I was conscious, of course, and I was kind of watching it all happening and adding my little bits and pieces. But when it came, when I finished, I thought to myself, well, this is really very interesting, because it told the story of this extraterrestrial entity who arrived here, many, many millions of years earlier, and gradually sort of shaped itself up in order to sort of, in a sense, sort of join us genetically in a way. They're sort of deeply sort of encoded into our genes, this entity. So I think, well, this is, I don't, got nothing else to do. I'll take this seriously. And as a graphic artist, I said, well, what I'll do is that I'll create a sort of a book, and I'll just go on and do it as long as it takes. And it took 30 years.
Really? Wow.
So, I illustrated, and then I kind of came up with invented a sort of a particular kind of font that I used, and that got me kind of through about 20 years. And then it became so interesting because it was before I came across the Urantia book, and yet I found in this piece I'd received quite a lot of resonance with stuff that I was, starting to understand in the Urantia book. So I decided to write a commentary, and that's on the left-hand page is a commentary, and each page sort of derives a sort of a much deeper analysis of what that page is all about. And then, of course, the whole business of getting it printed and everything, and I found a publisher who kind of came into my life very magically. Didn't know quite why he was there, and then kind of fell in love with the book. And it's now being published, yes.
It's fantastic. What is the return of the red serpent mean? Is this what you were saying in reference? I mean, I'm sorry, the rainbow serpent. Is this what you were talking about when you were asking the question about the serpent in the Garden of Eden? Is this how you I guess encapsulated it or saw it or?
Well, if you know the Australian Aboriginal mythology, the rainbow serpent, in a sense, kind of, in many ways, formed the landscape. Comes from the etheric, and the landscape forms around it. And there was quite a lot of resonance between the Helianx and this rainbow serpent. So I kind of put it in more as a sort of a cheeky little thing. And I'm not completely, there's quite a lot of the work that I do. I don't understand, I try to understand it, and that's why I write my books, basically to understand what I'm being shown, and because I think as probably you've experienced, after years of experience, one not only becomes more open to these various different experiences, but one becomes more useful to the universe, and they give you more unusual experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my work is really trying to sort of deconstruct, decode, and try to understand how all these experiences sort of knit together, into basically a harmonious whole, because, it is all part of one thing in many ways, in the deepest way.
And what is the Helianx? What does that word mean?
I really don't know what it means. It came to me in very early on, because the whole Helianx proposition basically was a sort of summation of a series of visionary experiences I'd had over about 20-year period. And in one of those visionary experiences, the name of this entity that I kept seeing was called the Helianx. I mean, that's the name of its race, in a sense. Individually, it was called Noe, or at least that's what it said it was called.
Very interesting. And what does the Helianx proposition offer us, or is it experiential more than intellectual?
Yes, it is more experiential. I wouldn't say than intellectual, because I think what the experiential does is that it tickles our fancy. It kind of, in a sense, invites us to, go further in to intellectually understand it. So I think that's how spiritual experience works. It never tells you the complete thing. It always beckons you on, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because of course there's much more to know than there is that we know already. Endlessly more to know.
Because it's funny, man. I can relate to what you're saying a lot because, it's very, very parallel to the experience I had with writing my book as well. And I guess for lack of a better term, it becomes fractal, where the deeper you go, another whole world begins to open up, and you go deeper in that, another world opens up.
Yeah, pretty much like that, yes. And of course, the worlds get more complicated as you get deeper. Yeah, that's a good idea. I don't think in terms of fractals that there should. I think more in terms of stacked dimensions. Rather, the like the core, of an onion, where you get those multi-layers.
Yes.
That's why I call it the multiverse. We know so little about dimensions. I mean, even now physics is just starting to sort of use the word dimensions, but of course even there, in their 11 dimensions or 6 dimensions, they're all tiny and enfolded and all, but these are dimensions, as real as the dimension that we're in right now, the third dimension.
Yes. And is this something that a reader will begin to comprehend by reading the Helianx Proposition? Does it help to create comprehension of the multiverses or the multidimensional aspect of our reality?
I wouldn't say that the Helianx does that as much as expand possibilities. I mean, I can't. The fact and fiction is a tricky one. When you get into this area, because it's more to do with how does it feel. The Helianx will resonate with some people because it kind of goes to explain why some people are so different from other people, and there does seem to be, a tremendous difference in between, people who are awake and people who aren't awake. I mean, now, on one level, people who aren't awake will at one point wake up, no doubt.
Yeah.
But it's pretty embedded, it's pretty solid. So the question, of course, that I think everybody asks themselves is, why am I so different from my family? Why am I so different from my friends? And I think that one of the things that happens to a number of us as we grow up. And part of this idea of the return of the Rebel Angels is a much more detailed analysis of, what happened to the angels who rebelled? Where are they now? And what I'm being shown through my work with Georgia is that they are, or I should say we, to be honest, we are reincarnating as human beings and living life out as human beings in order to experience the ramifications of the decisions that we made, by following the rebels. I mean, we're living on a rebel planet, It's a very difficult planet.
Yes. I can't help but want to interject a little bit of this into our discussion because when I saw the return of the Rainbow Serpent, I couldn't help but think of of course the Hopi prophecy of the rainbow people returning to Earth. As well as within the New Age movement, talking about the incarnation of indigo children, crystal children, rainbow children, and how that all plays into everything that we're talking about here today. What are your thoughts of that, of indigo children or indigo adults? I've been called an indigo adult. I've been called a rainbow child. Where does this all play in? Is this a part of the story, or is there, in your summation, an incarnation of, like you said, the angels, the rainbow, etc.?
Yes. I mean, I think we're all kind of, in this particular sort of business, looking for some overriding explanation, for, all these various different manifestations. Because, I mean, what is incontrovertible is that these children are manifesting. I mean, they are very different. I mean, I've hung out with these children because I've done a lot of work with underwater birthing. One of my books is, at least a third about what happens with underwater birthing.
Oh,
and
wonderful.
who are these children who are coming through. And, of course, they are telepathic. They're incredibly, one-minded, as well as being able to individuate. So, I have to sort of, obviously, from my own understanding of it, I'm not saying this is it. I'm not saying this is the best explanation that I've come up with, that really explains what's happening to me, satisfies me. And that is that, all these various different manifestations are basically little rebel angels, coming into human incarnation. And some are going to turn out, good, and some are going to turn out bad. A lot of us, have to go through a fairly difficult childhood in order to sort of, harden ourselves, because angels don't have very strong emotional bodies. Because when you don't have that many choices to make, you don't have to have a very strong emotional body. So when you come into an emotional, basically an emotional wilderness like we're living in, you often need to have very difficult childhoods in order to strengthen up those emotional bodies. I'd like to think that a lot of these new children are coming in are choosing to come in on families that treat them in a way, because we do also build on our forefathers' heads, in a sense.
Yes. And the idea, you struck a nerve with me when you said the idea of not having the emotional wherewithal to navigate our emotional wilderness here on the planet. And I know I was one of those children. And as far as what we see on the mainstream media, for lack of a better term, we see this drugging of people who can't handle the emotional wilderness with antidepressant and an antidepressant for the antidepressant and on and on and on, and I can't help but wonder, is this helpful to help navigate, or is this created to stifle the growth of that individual?
It's kind of terrible if you think about it, because by the age of 20, of course, they're drug addicts.
Yeah.
Accuse them of being drug addicts. No, I mean, we haven't yet seen the worst of that, I don't think, because it's going to be coming. No, I mean, I feel rather sort of impotent, because I can't suggest any better way of dealing with it. I'd like to think that knowledge would be helpful, that if these people, if these children, knew a little bit more about who they were.
Yeah.
I'm not writing for children. I guess I think from the people who sort of send me letters, I get letters mainly from sort of people in their 20s and 30s, and then, a lot of people considerably older. So I think probably they're just going to have to fight their way through it.
I happen to agree with you with the education part. I feel that if we knew what we knew now, so to speak,
Yeah, well, exactly.
it's always that conundrum. If I knew then what I know now, perhaps it would be different, and especially with the parents. How to react to these situations would be something wonderful. But like you said, we're kind of in a kindergarten infancy of our spiritual evolution. So we're still fumbling around in the dark trying to figure these things out. But I would hope.
And yes, and that's as in many ways as it should be, because in the fumbling, we find out who we are. We find out, who to adhere to and who to avoid.
Yes, absolutely.
The only way of doing it, you can't teach these things. So I think we're stuck with that one. I'd like to think that, by the age of 25, for instance, somebody would be ready for, as you were, obviously, with your near-death experience at 24, By the way, were you sent back, or how was that handled?
It was actually during a shamanic vision quest, and I died. I was afraid to die, and I let myself die, and I saw myself rise above my body, and the whole experience took off from there.
Right. No, but my question was, were you? You're coming back. Were you told to come back? Were you asked
I was
to go
forced to
back?
come back. I didn't want to come back.
No, of course not.
I was forced to come back, and I was told that from what I had seen, and I know it's hard. I'm sure you know it's hard to translate it into words.
Well, yes.
But I was told it was my role to come back and show them the way back, as because I was looking at the planet Earth.
Yes.
And I saw the for lack of a better term, the light of spirit in each person coming down to earth and then returning back to the source of all creation and coming down to earth and returning. And I was supposed to, well, I'm told that my incarnation to come back is to show them the way back to source, for lack of a better term.
Yes. Gotcha.
Whether it be through practices or whatnot.
Mission.
And what?
A noble mission. Good view.
Oh my goodness.
Well,
very noble.
The thing about our true mission, is it really is the most natural thing in the world. It's the thing that we really love to do. It just takes a bit to discover it.
Yes, it
one
does.
has to die to discover it.
Yeah, and many of us have to go through very difficult situations to do that. And I will say, on my personal journey, I had to go through more difficulties after knowing it in order to embrace it.
Yes.
I was not ready to embrace it.
Yeah, that's part of grounding it, isn't it? That's part of bringing it into the incarnation.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think it took me 7 years as well. I mean, I was still in the process. It took me 4 years to get out of that. Because I was kind of like one of I wasn't the leader by any chance. I was one of the main men there. And I had to kind of find some way of getting myself out, without letting everyone down.
Right. Very interesting, though, again, that whole conflict of that self-identity and like we said, finding our purpose or cause and I'm wondering, do you feel that every single individual on this planet has a quote unquote mission?
Absolutely do, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go into near-death experiences, there's quite a lot now known about them and written about them, and there's been a wonderful show on television, one of these channels that, talking to 3 people who came back, and they were very wonderful and open about it. And then it's, to my knowledge, everybody who has had contact out there has been told to come back for one reason or another. I mean, as you said, obviously, once you're out there, it's the most wonderful thing in the world. Very few people ever want to come back. But what starts to happen in a lot of people is that they start thinking about their children. They start thinking about somebody who's dependent on them, a mother or something like that. And then, that is then pointed out to them that that's the reason they have to come back. But yeah, no, everybody has, I think, very, I don't know how specific the missions are, but there's certainly things to be completed, put it that way.
Yeah, yes.
Because I know from my own experience as a reincarnate, there are some things that I hadn't handled, I hadn't dealt with in a fairly immediately previous incarnation, which had to come up, and I had to deal with, in this lifetime. And I guess that was one of the things. When the entity said to me, "You've completed what you came to do," I think that's probably what I had to deal with. Because I've been aware for some time this is my last incarnation. Do you have that feeling, by the way? This is your last?
Yes, I have that feeling immensely, and I actually, during that out of body time, that NDE time, I was taken back to the moment when I committed myself to continue to incarnate until my mission was done, which I found to be very profound and a little disturbing. When I came back, I was like, why did I do that?
It's a funny feeling, isn't it? But of course, time always says, as time unfolds, one realizes why one did it.
And speaking of which, well, actually, this is probably going off on a little bit of a tangent, but I can't help but wonder, for those of us who are aware of our mission, like yourself and myself, the idea of working simultaneously in multiverses. If we're done in one multiverse, are we done in this dimension, so to speak? And the reason why I bring that up, an article was published recently by, I believe it was a quantum physicist, who said he discovered what happens after death. And he said, you just move to another timeline, that there are multiple timelines happening all at once. And when you die, you just move to another aspect of that timeline. And I wonder what your thoughts on the multiple timeline are, and as well as the mission of this particular incarnation in this dimension.
Yes, I think probably the scientist was explaining things in the way that he understands things.
Yes.
I do think there are multiple timelines. I don't know how many of them, but I do think there are a number of them that sort of we shift between them in a sense. We shift. Georgia goes into this in one of her books in quite some detail.
Oh, wonderful.
And it really is. It's quite an interesting because you see, it's a much larger situation than just us. It involves angels, it involves extraterrestrials, it involves other entities, it involves, the whole sort of plant and animal kingdom. I mean, everybody's involved in this. And as you say, it's a living planet, so the living planet is also involved. It's a massive operation. And, we can we know now, I think, that we play a great part in creating our reality, or co-creating our reality.
Yes.
Because, of course, there's a lot of other things. And our realities are co-created, individually, and also collectively. The New York reality is an American reality, is a planetary reality. And obviously, as individuals, we have individual realities which are kind of co-created by our angels and by us in order to produce situations from which we can derive learning, from which we can derive experience that we can take through with us, because they are kind of growing our souls in a way. Now, in terms of when we die, yes, we do move into different realities. I don't think they're parallel timelines. I think they are more like the bardos, if you like, if you know that, sort of the 7 bardos. The first 2 bardos, or the first 2 of these, are I think they're called compensatory zones. In other words, if one's had a very difficult life in this life, then perhaps in the compensatory zone one would have a much more easygoing life.
Yeah.
And vice versa, And we all basically have to take responsibility for our actions and for the consequences of our actions. And a lot of the consequences of our actions are played out in these after-death realms, And then, of course, it's continue. It's not like the Christian concept, we go straight to heaven. Oh, no, we don't. It's a very, very long trail of getting more and more refined. Our souls becoming more and more mature and understanding and knowledgeable and wise. It takes a long time.
Yeah, it seems that as I have studied more and more of these afterlife experiences, near-death experiences, while there are common denominators in all of their stories, the end result always seems to be a little bit different. Especially, of course, many of them have to come back; they're told to come back, but it's not. You don't see the golden brick roads of heaven and that which is described in the Christian tradition. Many people sometimes have to go through, like you said, challenges and or blissful states, kind of like what you were just talking about, the compensatory bardo. So I have to agree with you. I think that it may not necessarily be another timeline, but perhaps it's experiential in reference to our consciousness and the development and evolution of our particular individual consciousness.
Yes, 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 I think it is. That's why I prefer to think of it as a dimensional shift in a sense, because, as you say, there is an extraordinary variety of experiences that people have, but it does fall under kind of a fairly broad sort of spectrum of, well, you know, what is it all about? And I think probably we get the experience that we need, just as we do in life. We get the experience that we need. It's almost like a sort of a peep into that other reality, and you know, we peep through the little hole that we're accustomed to, you know, and we see kind of what makes sense to us. I mean, I went through a whole series of different, I think definitely 4 different cycles in my near-death experience, you know, and I wonder maybe you did as well, you know, where, you know, the first experience is I was hovering, you know, above the Bath Valley, and then next experience was I was in a monorail car, and then the next experience I was being taken across the valley by 2 angels, and
Yeah.
I was in a chain of being wheeled. It was very different experience.
Very similar. We're coming up on a break, Timothy. When we come back, we're going to talk about our experiences a little bit. We'll be right back.
And now back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Let me just remind everybody, we're having this fantastic discussion today with Timothy Wyllie. If you'd like to learn more about Timothy Wyllie, his books, his art, you can go to www.timothywyllie, that's TIMOTHYWYLLIE.com. His book that we've been talking about is the Helianx Proposition, The Return of the Rainbow Serpent, and of course he's got many, many more books out there. As I said, I went on Amazon and there's a whole list of them. So there's lots of material. I'm actually very interested in reading some more of the Georgia material. But before the break, Timothy was sharing a little bit about his near-death experience, and Timothy, could you start again, because it sounds as if, and I think you had brought it up, that there were like certain levels of it, and could you start again?
Yeah, sure. I was lifted out of my body. I didn't know I was dying. I was really ill. I collapsed in my office. I fainted. My back had given out. My lungs had filled out. I think I probably had walking pneumonia or something like that. I didn't go to the doctor, so I didn't know what I had. So I kind of pulled myself home. I lived in New York and drew a bath. I'm kind of used to kind of healing my body in baths. You know, it's the way I go about things. Anyway. So I drew a bath, got into it, and within literally, I would say, a minute and a half of closing my eyes, I found myself being drawn out of my body higher and higher into the air. And I could look down, and I could see I was about 500 feet over a vast valley, beautiful valley. And I saw a sort of a monorail curving up towards me in a monorail car, whizzing along on top of it. And next thing I knew, I was in the monorail car, and there was sort of 8 or 9 people in it with me, and there was a black man opposite me playing a trumpet. It was very beautiful. Sitting there, what on earth is going on, you know? I mean, I was absolutely conscious, fully, more conscious perhaps than I have ever been, you know. And then one end of the monorail car dissolved, and there was a being of light there, and I heard in my mind, I heard this voice saying, yes, it confirmed that I was dying, and I could look down and I could see my body in the bath, way, way, way below me. And I saw that I could just slip into the bath, and it would just be very, I wasn't in my body. It was all fine. But then the voice said, no, but you've done what you came to do. So we're going to give you the choice. You can either come on, or you can go back. And they gave me a couple of moments to think about it. And as I said before, it was my curiosity that got me back. So I said, no, okay, I'll go back. And the next thing I knew, I was on a sort of flat plain, sort of rise overlooking this vast plain, beautiful, with mountains in the background. And I was aware of these very large figures of light either side of me. And there was a sort of structure in the middle of this plain, an enormous sort of building that seemed to be both alive and also a building. Next thing I knew, I was being drawn into that building by these two either side of me. I was pulled across the plain into the building. Next thing I knew, I was taken and put on this sort of slab, and I realized it was kind of like an operating room. And these little guys, I guess you could call them kind of little greys or something, were scuttling around very fast all around me. And this taller female come up behind me, and I female because she's in a very female voice. This is going to hurt, but it's only going to really hurt, but it's only going to be a very short time. And this machine kind of swung out over me, and something whizzed down into my tummy, and then whizzed back out, and it was really painful, but it only lasted a very short time. And then next thing I knew, I was off that. And then I was taken somewhere, and I was told I wouldn't remember where this was. And in fact, I did remember a little bit later, because I'd read somebody else who had a similar experience. And it was heaven. I was taken to heaven. And then the next thing I knew, I was down in my body. My body was healed. I got about my bath. The water was tepid. I must have been out about 20 minutes, I guess. So the temperature of the water, I got out. I was totally healed.
Oh, isn't that amazing? I can't help but point out the fact of what I will call the extraterrestrial experience. I had a very similar one, where and the reason why I want to bring it up is that it was. I don't think I even realized that these were extraterrestrials until many years later, when I was describing being on this craft with these 7 light beings looking down at the planet. And somebody said, well, those were probably the extraterrestrials that were guiding you in your next step of evolution or whatnot. But it was very, it's funny, strange, or funny, coincidental how that's a parallel thing. You were healed, and I was given my mission.
Yes. Yes, well, I guess I was too. I mean, it wasn't sort of read out to be in the same way as it was to you, but as we both know, and as anybody who's had one of these experiences, and there are different levels of near-death experience as well.
Yeah.
I think the experts who do writings on these things say about 10% of them actually go all the way, the whole way. And it sounds like we did that. So you've got to go through that death barrier to get there and lose the fear of death. Did you when you came back, you lost all your fear of death, yes?
Yes, I did. As a matter of fact, that was a big part of it because I knew I was dying. Yeah. And I was resisting. I said, oh my God, I'm dying. I am literally, my body is dying. And but I will say it was very interesting because this was done during a shamanic, journey, and I was on a very large amount of quote-unquote medicine, which I believe is probably what created the death experience. But I remember when I floated up, I saw these beings that wanted to get into the room, and they were not friendly. It was like I want to call them the flying monkeys. I call them the flying monkeys. They didn't have wings, but I call them the flying monkeys. Like black, ugly, malevolent creatures that were trying to get into the room I was in, but because I believe that the room was sanctified or ritualized, purified, and whatnot, they couldn't get in. And that really was very disturbing to me. And I remember wanting to go back because they were there. I was like, I got to go back because there was somebody else in the ceremony with me, and I wanted to warn them. And again, the floating experience, same thing. Floated up into this quote unquote craft, a circular craft looking down on the planet. But for me, it was very interesting because we talked about aliens walking into us. Well, I walked into one of the beings of light. I became her. She was a female, or of feminine persuasion, and I walked into her body, and she was talking to me in my head as they were talking to me, of course, in my head. And we were looking. I could see the Earth from the bottom of this circular pedestal that we were on. I'll call it a craft now. I didn't call it that back then. And they were showing me the horrors of humanity: war, greed, poverty, people going hungry and dying, and the pollution on the planet, all these horrible things, which I was never even aware of as a 24-year-old. I was like, happy-go-lucky, making lots of money, going out to nightclubs. I had no idea all these things were going on. And it was just very interesting because then after that, I was being pulled up even higher, and that's when I got pulled up into the whole, I guess you could call it the common experience of going into the gold. I saw a golden light, and going into the golden light and seeing the whole universe from within the golden light, and not wanting to leave the golden light. And that's when that voice said, "Now you've experienced love or source. You have to go back there and show them how to return to love, return to source." And it was literally, I was dropped, from there into my body, and it felt like I slammed into the couch, and I woke up and started writing everything down.
Yes, I did too. Yeah, yeah. I was much more gently. I came down in a series of like pop, 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 pop. Very sweet, gentle.
Oh, lucky you! They were rough with me.
I've had a standing back before. Yeah. There's the dark entities. It's interesting, of course. I mean, there's the astral, astral shades, but mostly there are thought forms.
Yes, yes.
And I think, we have to be much more understanding about what, the power of thought and what thought does. Because, yes, the astral is basically full of these thought forms. And a lot of the negative thought forms are really, really, really quite unpleasant,
Absolutely, and many of them are created by us.
Well, they're all created by us.
Yeah.
No, they're all. I mean, the human imagination is, we are creative beings, and one of the things we create are thought forms. I don't know about you. I've had some really fairly harsh lessons in this one.
Yes, yes.
I've had to really take stock,
I have literally gone through. I'll say that after that particular experience, I will say that I was very rebellious against embracing my calling, quote unquote, for many years.
You were testing it, I think.
Yes, yes, it kind of was. It kind of was, but in doing so, I believe that I created a thought form that I call it a Klingon, something that just clung to me and just made my life very, very harsh, very, very miserable. Very, very difficult. And it wasn't until I identified that and released it that the healing began to happen, and the journey toward the work I'm doing now happened after that. But I definitely identified that as a thought form that I had created that clung to me.
Yes. Well, now you see, you're raising an absolutely central issue, because from my work with the angels, because all the way through 1980s, 1990s, I was, working very closely with angels and doing precisely the work you're talking about. Because it's actually perfectly natural for us to talk to our angels and to talk to by them. It's natural. That's our heritage. It's us who prevent it. It's all the things that, the impossibilities that we're not worthy, oh, this is, it's not true, it's all fabricated, it's all imagination, all that sort of stuff. And the thought forms that we pick up as children, because they impact us. They stick in our subtle energy bodies.
Yes.
And this is really what prevents us. So a lot of the work we do with angels, basically, because they are actually quite easy to release once you know how, is a question of finding out where they are, locating them, finding out who they are, putting them into the heart, dialoguing with them. And when you dialogue with them, you generally find out that they think they're serving you.
Yes, yes. Isn't that hysterical? Exactly.
Isn't it just? They think they're sweet and kind and they're helping you out. And you've just got to create a situation where, something else is more interesting for them.
It's very funny. As I went through that experience, my quote-unquote entity said, well, isn't this what you wanted? And I was,
there you go.
And again, I did the very same thing you said, pulled it into my heart. I said, I love you, thank you. And I literally felt it just go out the window and it was gone.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Well, one of the books, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm done.
One of the books that we haven't mentioned that I wrote with a couple of other people called Ask Your Angels. That really was about, getting into the the gritty, of how to deal with all this. And there's a long series of meditations. You seem to have picked it up quite naturally, which basically goes through exactly the same series of processes of identifying them. Because a lot of diseases, you see, are created by these things.
Yes.
They just linger in the emotional body. And of course, they descend, through the subtle energy bodies in order to lodge in the physical body. So they're easier to catch, if you can catch them in the spiritual or the emotional body before they, get down into the physical.
And that I feel I can't help but bring up, of course, my purpose is to show everybody the way back. So my motivation is how do we bring the awareness to people to be aware of these things, But this is how we catch it. This is how we get rid of it. This is how, but the reality of it is, and not to be to put a damper on this wonderful conversation that we're having, but 60-70% of the people would be like, what are they talking about?
Well, yes, and that's one of the crosses one has to bear. I think as a writer, I think one has to decide, am I writing for the sort of general public or am I writing for my peers?
Yes.
Who aren't perhaps, quite as aware, who just need a little jogging along. That's my preference. I find it very difficult to write for, for the general public, because I know perfectly well that, as you say, you're very generous when you said, whatever it was, like 95%. But I think there's something that the Enrich book says, the actors are the consequences gods. I think we just have to do, we have to act according to, our inner feelings, which presumably are, part of the guidance system, that we have with our angels. And not be too disturbed about the consequences, as long as our intention is pure and we know what we're doing. The consequences take care of themselves.
I couldn't agree more. You took me back to a time when I was still for quote unquote in the mainstream, in my prior career to this, and one of my employers said to me, you really live on the fringes of society. And I just automatically and comfortably said to her, I much more prefer it that way.
Well, that's where the, interests happen at the borders of things, isn't it? That's where things come alive, the fringes of things.
Well, that's where quite honestly, I believe that is where the great work, quote unquote, happens, where the true evolution of humanity comes from the out of the box thinking and living and just the idea of kind of what you were describing earlier, living genuinely and into what you truly are, what you feel, what you're trying to get across, and doing it from a genuine point of view versus that filter of what is acceptable to the masses is a great example for others, I feel.
It was a different game, isn't it? I mean, I'm in a fortunate situation. I invented something when I was 15 that I'm still living on.
Wonderful.
So I don't need to write books to make money, which is a tremendous relief, of course, because that takes out a whole slab of
right. What is it that you invented, if I could ask, please?
I invented a slide and a photographic storage system.
Oh, okay, wonderful.
That was before computers and everything like that. But it was something that nobody had thought of, and I invented it for my mother's company. And she said, "Oh, what a good idea!" And she went out and made the thing, and it became, the standard way of storing slides and photographs all over the world.
Wow, fantastic! You're very dynamic in many different ways, Timothy. It's such a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, likewise. There's not many of these interviews I do with people who've had near-death experiences and are able to sort of resonate so closely with what I'm talking about.
Oh, well, I appreciate. I enjoy being able to. I think that's the reason why I do the show the way I do. It also gives me the opportunity to ruminate with similar experiences with our guests.
Sure. Well, absolutely. And there aren't many people. I mean, there aren't many people one can talk to, quite as openly as this. And to be able to do it over the air, of course, it's just a wonderful thing. But I don't know if you've noticed that as one progresses through life, one actually starts to gather the sort of people one can talk to around one. So, it's not quite as isolated. Although I do prefer to, I live on my own in the middle of the desert, because I can't hear myself in New York. I lived in New York. I couldn't write in New York because of the constant sort of psychic barrage that I lived in.
Yeah. I too moved from Miami to Roanoke for that very reason, and even Roanoke is a little busy, but nothing like South Beach.
No, absolutely. Yes, there's so many things like this that people just, if they knew what was going on, it would be so much easier for them. If they knew the sort of psychic cover-up that makes it so difficult to sort of actually sort of follow the path, in these big cities. It would be a lot easier because they could cope with it. Or they could, know where to go. I mean, if I needed to write, I would have to leave New York, But then I understood that, and that was fine once I understood it.
Well, Timothy, we're about to run out of time. I can't believe this conversation is coming to an end so quickly. It went by so fast. What if you had one thing, and if you could just think of it rather quickly, what would be the one thing you would tell all of humanity if they were listening to you right now?
I would say, listen. Really listen. Don't hear, listen. And we listen with our bodies. We listen with everything. We listen with our interest.
Ah. That's a very good point. A very good note to end on. Absolutely. And the name of the book is The Helianx Proposition, The Return of the Rainbow Serpent. You can learn more about Timothy and all of his great work. Talk about a wonderful history of work that he's done at timothywyllie.com, TIMOTHYWYLLIE.com. Timothy, do you tour or anything anymore?
I really try not to. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next week here on the justBernard Show.